Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to get up close and personal with a part of your body you probably don't think about too much, your jaw.
Yeah, the mandible, it's often overlooked, but trust me, this bone has some stories to tell.
For real.
Yeah.
And get this, the mandible. It's actually the strongest bone in your entire skull. Bet you didn't expect that.
It's true. And on top of that, it's the only bone in your skull that actually moves. Well, besides those tiny ones in your inner ear, of course.
Okay, so it's strong, it moves, but why should we care? Well, by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a whole new appreciation for your mandible. We're going to uncover its secrets, from its anatomy to some surprising facts about what it can reveal about us.
It's a window into our evolution, our health, even our habits.
All right, so first things first, let's get oriented. Imagine, if you will, a horseshoe.
Because the mandible basically is what? At least the main part of it.
Exactly. That horseshoe shape gives your chin its shape and sits right below your upper jaw. That's what we call the body of the mandible.
And branching up from this horseshoe on each side, you've got these kind of like wing-like structures. Those are called rami.
Rami, got it.
Yeah.
So is there like a specific name for where the ramus and the body of the mandible meet?
There is. It's called the gonial angle. And you know what? That angle can actually tell us a lot about a person. It changes as we age, and it differs between males and females.
Wait, like how they age faces in those police sketches? That's amazing. I had no idea it was that precise.
It's all about the subtle ways our skeletons reflect our lives and our biology. Okay, moving on from the body and rami, we've got these bony projections called processes. Two key ones are the coronoid process and the alveolar process.
Those sound familiar.
Yeah.
Let me guess. Those are important for like chewing and stuff.
You got it. The coronoid process up at the top of the ramus is where your chewing muscles attach. It's what gives those muscles the power to bite and chew.
Talk about a powerhouse. And what about the alveolar process? That one sounds kind of, I don't know, dental
I
related.
could say that. The alveolar process is what holds your teeth. Each tooth is actually anchored into the alveolar process by this special type of joint. Most people haven't even heard of it. It's called a gymphosis.
Omphosis. Okay. Gotta admit, I'm gonna need you to break that one down for me.
Well, imagine it like this. Well, imagine it like this. The tooth is like a peg fitting into a hole in the bone.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's held firmly in place by all these strong, fibrous tissues. That's your gymphosis in action. Pretty cool, huh?
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. So it's not just your jawbone holding onto your teeth, it's this whole intricate system. It makes you realize there's so much more to even the simplest actions. Like just taking a bite of food.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And speaking of intricate systems, we can't forget about the nerves, blood vessels, and muscles that are also crucial for your jaw to function properly. They're all woven into and around your mandible.
Yeah, one of our sources mentioned a pretty important nerve that runs through the jaw. It's, what was it called? The inferior alveolar nerve?
That's the one. It's a branch of the trigeminal nerve. And that nerve is responsible for sensation in your face. Oh, and it also controls the muscles you use for chewing.
Right, the trigeminal nerve. That's the one your dentist numbs before poking around in your mouth.
Yeah.
But it's kind of crazy to think about this major nerve having a tiny little pathway through the bone itself.
Well, that pathway has a name too, you know? It's called the mandibular foramen. Basically, a small opening in the bone that lets the nerve pass through.
Mandibular foramen.
See, this is what I love about these deep dives. Always learning about things I never even knew existed. Like, I've definitely had my fair share of dental work, but I never really thought about that nerve or how it even gets to my teeth. It really highlights how interconnected everything is in there.
It really does. And it also makes you realize how even the smallest disruption can have a big impact. Which actually brings us to some of the things that can go wrong with the mandible.
Right, because as amazing as this bone is, it's not invincible.
Exactly. Let's start with fractures. Unfortunately, they're pretty common.
A blow to the face, a
Yeah.
nasty fall. The mandible is definitely vulnerable.
It is. But the good news is treatment is usually really effective. Our sources mentioned that depending on how bad the break is, the fracture can often be, like, manually repositioned.
Right, or in more severe cases, they'll use surgery to put things back in place.
Okay, so a fractured jaw is definitely something you don't want, but it's treatable.
Yeah.
What about other problems?
Well, another issue that can come up is misalignment.
Misalignment.
Yeah, and this could be due to all sorts of things, like an injury or even things from when you were a kid, thumb sucking. That kind of thing can actually impact how the jaw develops.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that. So even something seemingly harmless like thumb sucking can have long-term effects on your jaw.
It can. And we're not just talking about aesthetics here. Misalignment can really throw off your bite,
Makes sense.
leading to problems with chewing, jaw pain, headaches. Our sources even mentioned a connection to neck pain and posture.
Whoa. It's crazy how something being out of whack in your jaw can have this ripple effect throughout your body. Okay, that's definitely going on my list of things to avoid. What else?
Well, speaking of things going out of whack, dislocations, this is where the mandible actually pops out of its socket.
Ouch. That sounds super painful.
It can be, but like fractures, treatment usually involves getting things back into alignment. Sometimes they can do it manually, other times they need to go in and do surgery.
Okay, so far we've covered fractures, misalignment, and dislocations. What about that thing TMD? Remember seeing that?
Yes, TMD. That stands for temporomandibular joint disorder. It's really common, and it affects the joint where your jaw connects to your skull.
Right, the TMJ.
Exactly. It's often misunderstood because it can show up in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, one of the sources had a whole laundry list of symptoms. Jaw pain, stiffness, headaches, even earaches. It's crazy how something affecting your jaw can cause pain in so many different places.
It is, and the reason for that is because all the muscles involved in chewing and jaw movement are interconnected, so tension in one area can easily spread to other parts of your head and neck.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting, because one of the sources mentioned a link between TMD and sleep apnea. I had no idea those two were connected at all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating connection, and it actually goes both ways. Sleep apnea can make TMD symptoms worse, and TMD can make sleep apnea worse.
So someone with sleep apnea might be more likely to clench their jaw, which then leads to TMD, and then having TMD makes it harder to sleep soundly.
Exactly. It's like this vicious cycle. It really highlights how important it is to look at the whole picture,
Yeah.
both for diagnosis and treatment. Addressing one issue might actually help with the other.
Wow, I'm definitely going to be thinking more about that connection. Okay, so we've covered fractures, misalignment, dislocations, and TMD. Was there anything else in our sources? Anything else we should be worried about?
There was one more condition. It's not as common as the others, but it's definitely something to be aware of. It's called osteomyelitis.
Osteo what?
Osteomyelitis. And it's not a fun one. It's a bone
A
infection.
bone infection in your jaw. How does that even happen?
Well, it can happen when bacteria get into the jawbone, like through a deep cut, maybe a dental procedure that went wrong, sometimes even a really bad tooth infection that spreads.
So even something that starts out as a minor dental problem could turn into something much more serious.
It can, yeah. That's why it's so important to take care of your teeth. Brush, floss, see your dentist regularly, all that good stuff.
Okay, noted. I am definitely due for a cleaning after this. So we've learned about all these different conditions that can affect the mandible, some more common than others, but sounds like a lot of them can be prevented or at least managed with proper care.
Absolutely. And that's a really important takeaway. I mean, the mandible, it is a strong bone, but like any part of the body, it is vulnerable.
It really makes you appreciate how much we rely on this one bone.
Right.
I mean, we need it for chewing, for speaking, even just for holding our lower face together.
It's true. It's just not something most people think about until something goes wrong.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am feeling a newfound respect for my mandible after this deep dive.
Me too. It's a pretty remarkable piece of, natural engineering.
Speaking of remarkable, I can't let you go without circling back to something we touched on earlier. The whole thing about male and female mandibles actually being shaped a bit differently.
Right, right. Yeah, that was one of the things that really jumped out from the research.
Yeah.
Men tend to have these larger, more squared off mandibles, while women's are typically smaller and more rounded.
Now, obviously there are always exceptions, but it makes you wonder, why the difference? Why do you think that is?
Good question. It could be a bunch of things, maybe hormones, muscle mass, differences in how men and women have evolved to use their jaws. I mean, think about it historically. Men were probably more likely to use their jaws for things that required a lot of force.
Interesting. So it's like our skeletons have adapted over time to suit our lifestyles.
Exactly.
That's so cool. But here's something else to think about. Our sources, they only focused on those biological differences between men and women's mandibles, right? What about other things that could affect jaw development?
That's a great question. It could be anything, right? Diet, nutrition, environmental factors. Who knows? Those are all areas that would be really interesting to explore further.
Right. Like, could someone who grew up chewing on really tough foods end up with a stronger, more developed mandible because of it?
Maybe. There are so many possibilities.
This is why I love these deep dives. Always more to ponder.
Me too. It's a good reminder that there's always more to learn, even about something as, seemingly simple as a jawbone.
Well said. So to everyone listening, next time you take a bite of that delicious sandwich or strike up a conversation, take a moment to appreciate that marvel that is your mandible. You might be surprised by how much you discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of your own amazing anatomy.